Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the second part of the Re-Prepare webinar series. My name is Kiana Kabanji, and I will be your facilitator for this webinar today. I work at Washington State Emergency Management, and I'm the Disaster Preparedness Outreach Program Manager. Our team decided to name this webinar series Re-Prepare because preparedness is a repeating process. It's not a one-time checkbox that once you do it, you're done. It's a process that constantly needs to be reevaluated and reassessed. We need to review our hazards, we need to revisit our plans and restock our kits. So a few housekeeping things for you today. Questions and comments can be submitted in the Q&A box, and that can be found in the upper right corner of your screen. Captions are available by clicking on the settings icon in the lower right corner of your screen. Questions and comments, anything you'd like to tell us to engage with us can be added to the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we will have a time for questions and answers at the end of the presentations. But feel free to ask questions or offer comments anytime. We also have a brief survey for you to complete at the end of this webinar to let us know what you thought and what you learned and if this was helpful for you in your preparedness journey. So the link for that survey will be in the Q&A box, and you can complete that survey at any time. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered into a raffle for prizes. Prizes like a disaster starter kit and a weather alert radio, and last but not least, personal water filters. So we have awesome prizes, and we're really excited to send those out to you. So everyone who completes the survey will be entered into that raffle for prizes. To find that link, just head to the Q&A box. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. The link for that is also in the Q&A box. The first Re-Prepare webinar in this series, it was 2 weeks ago. We talked about home hazards and how to be creative with building disaster kits. It really can be simple, it can be easy, and it was a fantastic webinar. If you were unable to watch or you'd like to watch it again, you can find the link for that also in the Q&A box, and on our YouTube channel you can find other videos for DIY projects and how to make preparedness easy and even fun, and how to get your kids involved and keep them busy. So today we have two fantastic presenters for you. I'm excited for you to hear from them and learn from their wisdom and their experience. And they'll also be talking about two elements of being prepared for disasters. Those two things are emotional and mental resilience and being a preparedness champion and learning how to talk to your circles of influence about being prepared for disasters. You may know that September is National Preparedness Month, and if you didn't know that, now you do. So it's important to be prepared all year long. We can have hazards and disasters affect us and disrupt our lives all year long, and we try to highlight that during September. So September is National Preparedness Month, and this year we have launched our new Prepare in a Year book. Now this book also comes with a refrigerator reminder card, and this guide will walk you through 12 different action steps that you can take to increase the preparedness of you, your home, your family, and your circles of influence. So preparedness can seem overwhelming, it can seem daunting sometimes because there's a lot to think about. So we encourage you, grab this guide and walk through it doing one action a month. Over the course of a year, you will be so impressed with yourself for how better prepared you are to respond to disasters. So this guide, this booklet, and our refrigerator reminder card are available online. You can see the website on your screen. It's also in the Q&A box. You can snag it from there. The website for these materials, as well as the webinar slides and the resources and links for this webinar, all of that can be found at this website, mil.wa.gov/preparedness. You'll find all the good stuff there. That link is also in the Q&A box. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm so excited to present to you our first presenter. His name is Dr. Doug, and Dr. Doug is a member of the Washington Department of Health Behavioral Health Strike Team. And today he'll be talking to us about how to build and strengthen our emotional and our mental resilience before disasters, during, and maybe even after. We have all been affected by not only COVID-19, but also the wildfire season and other hazards around us. So it's so important to build that mental and emotional resilience before a disaster happens. So Dr. Doug, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Doug Ducherry. I am a psychiatrist with the Behavioral Health Strike Team, Washington Department of Health. And I'd also like to thank Kira Mosseth, who helped prepare this presentation. Let's see, Kiana, maybe we could go to the next slide. So first we'll be talking about key terms, doing some definitions, what to expect in the next few months, and also understanding impacts on you, on your teams, also on your family, and you as an individual. And then some ideas about developing resilience. Okay. So first definitions, burnout. This is a very common term, but basically it means that you're exhausted due to prolonged and unresolved stress, either in work or at home. The consequences are usually due to a disparity between the demands of the job or your family and the resources that are available. So what it boils down to is what you need versus what you've got, whether the resources meet your needs in the moment. And of course, these days we have so many demands with COVID-19, with the smoke, with the wildfires, and children that may be at home. So there are demands on families. Burnout, interestingly, in hospitals is a very common problem for physician residents. And it's thought now that some of that may be actually institutional with administrative changes. Some of that can be ameliorated. So let's see, next slide. Compassion fatigue, that's similar. It's very common with first responders, but anyone in a helping profession particularly may experience this, where you have a diminished ability to empathize or feel for others, can develop into kind of a numbness if you're too caught up in response or have so many demands that it's difficult to respond with empathy. And it's also described as secondary traumatic stress. Next slide. So resilience, there are ways to cope with both burnout and compassion fatigue, and it depends on, like everything, preparedness. The process involves having behaviors and thoughts and actions that help you to adapt, to be flexible in the face of adversity. And these skills can be developed by focusing on certain areas in your life. And we'll talk about that more in terms of connection and purpose, flexibility and adaptability. But what I'd like to stress is the importance of preparing and being ready to anticipating these changes. So next slide. Resilience factors are just those things that those approaches that we can use, and usually it consists of internal strengths, and that may include things like what have I done in the past, how have I coped in the past with difficult situations. It helps to sit down and basically take an assessment, take an inventory of your own strengths and things that ways that you've coped in the past, and also external resources, whether it's family members or co-workers or whatever it might be that can help you to cope with the stress of the situation. Next. So this chart is from SAMHSA, one of the government agencies, showing a typical response of a population to a disaster. This would be more likely, for example, in a hurricane or a tornado, where you have some warning ahead of time. You have an imminent threat, and then you'll see the impact. And there's a period there, well, you see the rising line where there's a sense of heroism and everybody's pitching in, and it's kind of a honeymoon period. So this will be a few months after or shortly after the disaster occurs. Everyone is trying to help out. And then typically groups go through a period of disillusionment. There's a decline until they hit kind of a bottom point. There may be trigger points along the way. For example, after an earthquake, there may be tremors that will set off little blips there that increase the anxiety and behavioral health symptoms. But usually, if it's a single event, there will be a recovery over time and reconstruction, at least a year and possibly 2 years or maybe more over time with periodic setbacks. What we're concerned about with COVID is this down spiral that may be extended if we have further shutdowns, for example. So next slide. So this is looking at possible scenarios for COVID-19 for the state of Washington and nationally and internationally. So the blue indicates possible resurgences of the virus that might cause further shutdowns. The yellow or amber cover indicate the amber color indicates possible behavioral health symptoms. So you can see after a recurrence or after a flare-up of the virus in a population, we may be experiencing more trailing kind of behavioral health symptoms. So this may go in waves, or as in the second scenario, there may be a large peak in the fall if it follows patterns typical of other kind of infectious diseases. We may see a more extended period of behavioral response or behavioral difficulties. Next slide. So what does this mean? Well, reasonably, we can expect that about 3 million Washingtonians will be affected to an extent that will be clinically significant. And by that, I mean possibly some impairment in work, some disturbance in family function. But that's a significant number. And typically the symptoms are depression, but there's also quite a bit of anxiety and acute stress. And from the numbers that we've seen so far, we're probably at the 2 million point right now. So there may be an additional million Washingtonians who could be affected. And that's a significant percentage of our population. Next slide. So these symptoms could be strong enough to cause significant distress or impairment for most people in this group. And there are things that we can do to kind of flatten this curve, just as we can flatten the curve for the virus. And those are behavioral health or mental health coping strategies. Part of it, as I said, is just anticipation, recognizing that this could happen and that we may run into this issue. Next slide. So these are common experiences during the transition from kind of the phase that we're in, from the honeymoon into a disillusionment phase. The thing to keep in mind is that these are normal reactions to an abnormal event. So everyone may either have these symptoms to various degrees or know someone who does, either being distracted, having trouble remembering things, having a short fuse, headaches or stomach aches or other kind of somatic symptoms, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. Sleep problems are very common right now. Emotional eating carbs, and feelings of sadness or loneliness. Even with all the meetings, it can have somewhat of a paradoxical effect. We have these video online meetings, and for example, after meetings with family, you may feel a little more lonely. That's completely normal. It's any of these symptoms are normal in such an abnormal situation. The difficulty comes if they're persistent or if they start to impair your ability to act within your family or in your work situation. Okay, next slide. So stressed brains in the workplace, this also applies at home. So when we respond emotionally, the emotional part of our brain can override the rational part. So the thinking part of our brain can shut down. And in extreme situations, for example, after a very traumatic shock, such as an earthquake, we may not be able to think rationally. We may need the support of other people just to help us get things sorted out. But for extended processes, when people aren't able to process the emotional events in their work or at home, burnout is likely. So if it's persistent, we want to try to avoid that. Other workplace factors include challenging work environments, or there may be few rewards. You may feel that you're not getting the best feedback, or you're not appreciated for your work, or this may also happen at home. Next slide. So it's important because compassion fatigue and job burnout can lead to further difficulties, including the way we see ourselves. If we're depressed or burned out, we tend to have a negative view of our abilities. We're more cynical about the world, about our meaning and purpose and the future. So that's what we want to try to mitigate and avoid if we can. Next slide. And remember, even the most people that have it together can suffer from burnout as well if they're not taking care of their own needs. And so it's important for all of us to pay attention and anticipate these issues as they come up. Next slide. So with COVID, there are pros and cons to the situation. In some ways, there's ways for employees to try out new roles, to force outdated processes to change. You may have seen that even if the situation with COVID is resolved, some workplace processes will be permanently changed. There'll probably be much more virtual meeting and less time in the office. But it also provides employees with a sense of autonomy, because in a home situation, they're more flexible in terms of how they do their work. The downside is that no one is immune to the effects of this, and that you have less social connection with your work group. You don't get the chance to have the hallway consultation or just stop and chat in the lunchroom. And then there's the additional sense of burden that the IMT here refers to the incident management team or whoever may be at work or managing this, additional sense of helping the team and being emotionally or physically compromised. Next slide. So there are opportunities for supervisors and managers. The main thing is that what you do is more important than what you say. So it's important to walk the walk and set the example for employees. And this is also true at home for parents in modeling for their children. You want to be honest and open in your communication. And if there's something that you don't know, acknowledge that and see if you can find a way to get an answer for that. Active listening is something that simply means trying to understand and care without trying to problem solve. We all have a tendency to say, have you tried this? Or what if you do this? Or maybe you should. If you find yourself saying that, it's not active listening. It's simply responding. So with active listening, you listen, you give feedback, you say, well, what I'm hearing you say is you're feeling really anxious about this, or you're worried about going to school because you're worried that you might catch this. Is that correct? Is that right? That's the active listening part where you can help someone else by giving them feedback. Okay, next. So key indicators for workplace stress and compassion fatigue and burnout as we go into the fall and winter are things like public school plans, the workload on parents. So parents may be stressed if there's, I know Bellevue schools have gone virtual for a while, and the future is uncertain about when they'll have in-person classes. Their economic fears, worries about unemployment and businesses closing. Of course, some of those businesses may be closing permanently. Reversal of phased openings, and that would impact schools as well as businesses. And then social and political restrictions. And, the run up to the election, there'll be political consequences or political difficulties for, whether it's on social media or television. We may be inundated with messages that may add to the stress. So next. So there's still challenging conditions to come. We may be looking at the peak of the disillusionment phase. So that's likely to be collectively worst for everyone. So it's just something to be prepared for. Next. To add to this, community and professional supports may be stretched. So, for example, if you're seeing a therapist, the therapist may not be quite as available due to demand. And as we said, there'll be maybe continued social and political issues at hand. Next. Weather may be a factor. The days will be getting shorter. We may be spending more time inside. There'll be financial issues for some, and then concerns about a possible second wave of infections. Next. So what can we do to reduce burnout? To develop resilience, we really need to try to maintain those connections. I can say personally, we have a family Zoom call with family members around the country, and we're actually communicating more, I think, now than we did before the pandemic. But it's important to maintain that connection with family and friends, to have a sense of purpose in what you're doing, whether it's your work or family, and to be flexible, recognize that things will not always go as expected. You have to be able to be flexible and adapt. And whatever source can give you hope, whether that's your friends, through your workplace, spiritual means, whatever has sustained you in the past will be more important than ever going forward. Next. So remind yourself of things that motivate you and increase your sense of purpose. Whatever, as I said, take an inventory, write down what kind of stresses you've experienced in the past, write down what has worked for you, write down what works well, what's been problematic, what have been the impediments, and take that personal inventory, and that can help you as you go forward. Next. Connect with people outside of work or socially within work. Next. Maintain and enhance those interpersonal boundaries. Know your limits and be sure to say no for tasks that take away from your work-life balance. So if you're in a situation that I think the best tagline I've seen is I'm writing this after hours. I'm writing an email after hours, so I don't expect you to respond immediately, but whatever your work hours are, that's fine. So ask others to help when you're reaching your limits. Next. So make a plan for these difficult events. As we said, write those down, take an inventory of the things that you do to handle stress, and track those especially difficult days or events, and implement those strategies. And if you need help, be sure to reach out. There is a helpline for Washington, and I should have more information on that later. Next. So develop personal resilience, and we call this the REST model. Reward yourself if you're doing a good job. Reinforce your work. Establish healthy boundaries. When you're off duty, stick to that boundary. If you're fortunate enough to be a two-parent family, trade off parenting responsibilities so that you have some alone time. Share your feelings and your concerns. Work with your support team and trust your support network, and reach out as you need to. Next. So finally, taking care of yourself takes care of the team and your family. So take the time off as you can so that you can do things that are not entirely work related. Find ways to reduce burnout, and doing those things in a business from the top down dramatically reduces burnout for team members. Next. So if you're looking for support, you can call this number anytime. Well, I can't say anytime. I understand that it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 6, and I think weekends, or 9 to 9, and I think weekends 9 to 6. 833-681-0211. That's Washington Listens. Next. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doug, for that incredibly valuable information. This information is relevant for all of us right now, for you listening and watching today, and for us, the team presenting this. So thank you, Dr. Doug, for joining us and for that information. Just a few reminders for you. We have a survey link. We'd love to hear your feedback on this webinar and what other information you would like to learn about now in this season of disasters this year. So please fill out our survey at the end of this webinar. A few other reminders for you. You can type in your questions and comments in the Q&A box. You'll find that in the upper right corner of your screen. Feel free to throw your comments in there anytime. We'd love to hear your questions and comments. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of our webinar after our next presenter, and captions again are available through the settings icon in the lower right corner. So our next presenter for you today is Rebecca Chatfield, another one of Washington's absolute finest. She comes to us from Bellevue Emergency Management, and she'll be talking with us today about how to be a preparedness champion and how to talk to your friends, your families, your neighbors about being prepared for disasters, because it's important and it's relevant for all of us, for everyone. So thank you, Rebecca, for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kiana. I'm going to talk to you today about community connections. And just a quick note about my background. I do education and outreach for Bellevue's Office of Emergency Management. I've lived in the beautiful Pacific Northwest my whole life, and I have worked in response activities as well for the city of Bellevue for COVID-19 and also some civil unrest activities. I have a PhD in sociology for the University of Washington. I've taught Cert for quite a while, and I have been known to give water filters as gifts, and my 3 kids are ready to never get a water filter ever again as a gift. So my goal today is to give you some examples, ideas, and resources, and hopefully maybe some inspiration for you as you seek purpose, meaning, and hope. So we know that emergencies and disasters will not politely wait until COVID-19 is over, and obviously we're dealing with wildfire smoke right now, so this idea that we have multiple events at the same time should come as no surprise to anybody. So that's why these webinars are called Re-Prepare. We need to keep the preparedness in mind because it's a journey and we have multiple events happening at the same time. And we do have a problem right now. We need to stay safe and healthy. We need to follow the public health guidelines from the Department of Health. We need to minimize our interactions with folks and engage in social distancing. It's important and we need to follow that. And here's a crucial point. We miss those connections with other people. We need those connections with other people. So let's link this need for human connection to disaster preparedness in particular. And I want to talk for just a moment about some research done by Dr. Daniel Aldrich. He wrote a paper called Social Capital in Disaster Mitigation and Recovery, and it was about the 2011 Japanese earthquake, the 9.0 earthquake, and the big tsunami that happened in 2011, and it actually killed 18,500 people. And he was quite interested in how did people do? Why did some survive? Why did some people recover quicker than others? And so he looked at the variation in death rates in Japan, and what he found was kind of surprising to him. He found the most powerful predictor in the variation of death rates, like how well did people do, was the strength of their existing social ties in their local neighborhood. The strength of existing social ties in their local neighborhood. Social ties make a huge difference before, during, and after disasters. People with more social ties and stronger social ties and a sense of place recover better from disasters. So if you think about it, this informal social aid can take the place of financial or medical supplies or other emergency supplies that might not be available from more official sources. So social ties with your neighbors provide a kind of informal insurance or mutual aid that allows you to recover more quickly. So we have to hold 3 truths in our minds at the same time. One is that it is important to keep preparing for emergencies and disasters. It's a process. We are working within the context of COVID-19, and so we need to stay safe. We need to wear masks. We need to wash our hands. We need to engage in social distancing and pay attention to the public health guidelines. But the third truth is very important too. Humans, we need other humans, right? We need to keep those social ties strong. So what can you do? So I would like to talk about 7 specific examples of how you can do something positive while keeping these 3 truths in mind. Here's example number 1, the Red Cross. The Red Cross has been around for 150 years. You probably know about this organization. They have 17 million volunteers in 200 countries. The Northwest region for Red Cross covers Washington and parts of Idaho. And Red Cross is engaged in disaster relief activities, 60,000 disasters a year, most of which are home fires where families are displaced out of their homes. And they provide food, shelter, emergency supplies, mental health counseling. Red Cross also does a lot of blood drives for blood donations. And you may have taken a first aid or a CPR class from Red Cross, because they do also provide health and safety training, and they've been doing that for over 100 years. So Red Cross always needs volunteers. And since it's a well-established organization, it's a really great first place to try. Okay, here's example number 2. Example number 2 is the Great Shakeout drill. So once a year, we all have an opportunity to practice our earthquake survival skills. And that's really simple. When an earthquake happens, you want to drop, cover, and hold on. You get down low, you get under something heavy, you're covering your neck and your head, you're holding on. And every year, I think it's the 3rd Thursday in October, there's a nationwide drill where for 60 seconds, you basically physically practice that drop, cover, and hold on. And as if there were a major earthquake happening right then. And it allows you to drill, to practice, to physically practice with your body, what do you need to do? Because research has shown that when we're in the middle of a disaster or an emergency is happening right in the moment, our brains and our bodies can freeze. And the more that you physically drilled how to do something, the quicker you just automatically do it. And it can be a life-saving move to have practiced this drill. So the Great Shakeout is at 10:15 on October 15th, and maybe you can see what they did there, 10:15 at 10:15. And you are welcome to sign up as an individual, family, a work group, a church, a neighborhood, however you want to do that on the website there. Okay, so sprinkled throughout the 7 examples are a few easy ideas for you to try. So here's an idea. You can distribute Great Shakeout flyers to your neighbors. Now, please do this socially distanced and wear your mask. And maybe you have a bulletin board in your neighborhood or a place where all your mailboxes are in one spot, and that might be a good place to put this information as well. Okay, here's example number 3. So this is FEMA's Youth Preparedness Council. The YPC was created in 2012 to bring together youth leaders. So these are high school kids, and they apply and are selected for the Youth Preparedness Council for a 2-year term, and they actually work pretty closely with FEMA to create projects for disaster preparedness. So they have worked on financial preparedness, translations of materials like games for kids. They've worked on citizen responder programs, and there's just a wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity. If you know a teenager who's interested in disaster preparedness, please point them towards this council. It's a really excellent opportunity. And I just also want to point out that there are some really amazing resources for children as well. If you go to ready.gov/kids, and that link will be in the resources, you can find some games. There's Prepare with Pedro, which is a fun curriculum, the Disaster Master game, and then something called a Ready to Help card game. And so here is another idea to try. You can go to ready.gov/ready to help, and that link will be available for you. You can download these materials on your own computer. You can also order the deck of cards. That's the Ready to Help game. And the idea is give that a whirl, play the game with a child. You might be surprised by the creative ideas that children can come up with. As we all know, children can sometimes get right to the heart of the matter and say surprising and honest truths that can be quite inspirational. Okay, so here is example number 4 to inspire you. This was a project that we did in Bellevue. We called it the 40,000 Masks Project because we had the great good fortune to receive a huge donation of cloth face coverings through King County. And what you're seeing here on this slide are the volunteers who work with me at the Office of Emergency Management for Bellevue. I put out a call for folks and said, hey, we've got a whole lot of masks, and we kind of need some help to put them in smaller packages and hand them out to the residents of Bellevue, Washington. And so amazing folks stepped forward. You can see there they're socially distanced. We partnered with Bellevue Chamber, and we took these bulk supplies of these cloth face coverings and we packaged them into smaller packages. You can see over there the picture. They're in baggies, basically, with a sticker on them. And then the volunteers went out into the community at malls and at Salvation Army and handed out these masks to families, and they were free. And it was really great. When you put up a sign that says free masks, oh boy, people, you become very popular very quickly. So that was an amazing project. It was a great way to involve volunteers. It was a great way to serve the community. And the point I'd like to make was you might be able to find a similar kind of project with your local emergency management organization or perhaps a nonprofit where you can step in and do something that's very meaningful, that helps your community, that maybe even just takes your mind off things that are bothering you right now. This was a really wonderful chance for people to be engaged. Okay, so here's another really quick idea for you to try. You could have a neighborhood creative mask contest and give out some fun prizes. If you want to take a picture of your favorite mask and send it in, the email in the Q&A that we might share it on social media. We'll see. Okay, here's example number 5. So CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. This is a FEMA approved curriculum that has been gaining steam in the US since the mid-90s. It's a way to learn hands-on disaster skills in person, and it involves some training and it involves some gear. You see the picture of the boots and the backpack and the gloves. So if you take the CERT training, you learn how to use all of those materials while you're learning how to do things like run a fire extinguisher the right way, or carry somebody out of a building on a chair with your teammates. You might learn how to wrap a wound. You will learn how to wrap a wound. You'll learn about team organization, disaster psychology, and all sorts of other really good and useful things. And the idea behind CERT is that in a widespread disaster, you're not, the first responders may be stretched pretty thin. So you will need to have some responders already trained in your neighborhood to step forward and help. So neighbors helping neighbors, neighbors are the first responders. And the CERT training is meant to give people a little bit more training so that they can more comfortably engage in those life-saving maneuvers and learn those disaster skills to be able to really, really help out their neighbors if something like that happens. So, but we cannot guarantee you that you will get the fabulous green polyester shirt like my CERT volunteers here have. So you may not be that lucky, but give a look to see if you can find a local CERT organization near you. Okay, so one thing about the CERT training that I did want to point out is it's a pretty hands-on and in-person kind of training. And obviously that last picture, it was before we were socially distancing. So we may need to pivot a little bit right now and take some online classes. So there turns out you can look around online, of course. FEMA has your back here. You can go find some free online classes pretty easily. Here's some topics for you: protecting your home from disasters, doing some earthquake basics, animals, the introduction to Cert classes on there. You can look up household hazardous materials. There's a class on that. So feel free to give a try to some of those classes, and the training link will be available for you as well. Okay, example number 6. Map Your Neighborhood is offered statewide in the state of Washington through your local emergency management office. And this is kind of a canned program or a pre-done program for you that it takes no special skills at all. And the idea is that you are given some brochures, some videos, some training guides, and you can pull together your neighborhoods, the people living right around you, and have some meetings and engage in some tasks together to get your own neighborhood more prepared. So you will learn the 9 steps you need to take immediately following a disaster. You'll do a skills and equipment inventory for your neighborhood and create a contact list and a map. And you'll do things like map out where your water turnoffs and where your gas turnoffs, house by house. Now, this can be adapted. It doesn't have to be single family homes. In a neighborhood, you can also use this program. For example, if you live in an apartment building and you might have each floor in the apartment building is equivalent to a street. So there's ways to modify this based on where you live. It's a great program. There's lots of free materials, and Kiana can certainly hook you up with some of those, and most of your local jurisdictions have access to the brochures, the videos, the guides that you need to use. Okay, example number 7. I'm very proud about this Bellevue neighborhood, Somerset. They actually have a community association now. This is a very well-established neighborhood with a lot of resources in place. They have a dedicated website, they have interest groups that they've worked out, neighbors, there's a whole system of neighbors trading favors with each other. They have a quarterly newsletter. They have preparedness trainings in block groups, community cleanup parties, lots of socializing and food. Now, obviously that picture as well is before the social distancing was put in place. There's just a long history of fun neighborhood parties and other get-togethers that form the base for some of this preparedness work that they started to do more recently. But they actually started with a big emphasis on Block Watch, which is a really old program. It's a crime safety neighborhood watch kind of program that they worked in collaboration with the Bellevue Police Department to do. And Somerset is a very diverse community. There's different ages, people come from different cultural backgrounds, lots of different religions and professions. There's a school there, and the parents are very tied with each other and work collaboratively with each other as well. But in general, Somerset has been quite successful in cultivating a culture of neighbors helping neighbors. So I wanted to present this as an example of a very well-established neighborhood, and they've gone deep on the disaster preparedness work. So of course that warms my heart. And one of the neighborhood reps, Angela, she told me you only need a few engaged people who want to build community, to organize, and to make things happen. The energy is contagious and motivating to others. And so I wanted to point that out. A few committed people can get the ball rolling, and you can end up in a great, fortunate situation like being part of a Somerset type neighborhood. But I would encourage you to be that person who maybe takes the first step to get the ball rolling for your neighborhood. Okay. Here's our one more idea to try. So here's something you might want to do in your own neighborhood. There are certain things that make sense to buy as an individual or a family, and there might be things that make more sense to buy as a group or to own or to share with your neighborhood. So these are just some examples of items that you might have in your neighborhood, inventory supply, but you wouldn't necessarily have, each household would have all of these items, but you might only need one for the whole neighborhood. So take a neighborhood inventory and customize it for your own neighborhood and what kind of disaster preparedness needs you might have. But this is one more idea for you to try. Okay, so thank you. I would encourage you to be a preparedness champion. There's a lot of ways you can do that. You can volunteer with places like the Red Cross or your local emergency management organization. You can practice skills like with the Great Shakeout. You can ask those children and youth for ideas and be startled and tickled and amazed by what they come up with. You can take classes or training, probably online right now, to be honest, and just in general, get to know your neighbors. You will be much better off, but I want to leave you with this thought that preparedness is a continuous journey. We're all taking this journey together, and any little thing that you do, it's good. It all helps. Thank you for your time. Go forth and re-prepare.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that fantastic information. And like she said, go forth and prepare. That might be the quote of today's webinar. I love it. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions, and we have some great questions that have been entered into the Q&A box. So I'll be facilitating this and asking our presenters, in addition to a few other preparedness experts who have joined us today, to be answering these questions. So if you have questions, feel free, add them in the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can. First question is for you, Dr. Doug. The question is, although we need to look out for our own needs, can you talk about how helping others can change your focus outside of your own troubles and concerns and provide hope?
That's an excellent question, and I think Rebecca did a great job of covering that. Just the idea of volunteering and helping others, reaching out. You know, Rebecca mentioned the Cert program, and one of the issues is, say, in a search and rescue, if you're assisting people out of a building, the first thing that you do is look for people that are able to walk and talk and are basically not injured, and put them to work, because that's the best thing that they can do, is if you can get a job for them. And in the same way, if we can stay busy, if we can get out and volunteer and help others, it's good for our own sense of self-worth. So thanks for that question.
Great, thank you, Dr. Doug. We have a few more questions. We'll get to those. A couple other reminders for you. You'll see on your screen information about signing up for local emergency alerts. If you live within Washington, please do sign up for local emergency alerts. If you live out of Washington, it's still important for you too, just I don't have that link on the screen. So make sure you do some research, hit Google, find your local emergency alerts. Super important all the time, and especially now as we are in wildfire season and just about hazard season. Anything could happen. So next question is for Sophia Lopez. She is with King County Emergency Management. And question for you, Sophia, is social media such as Facebook, that can be one way to stay connected to friends and family, but it can also amplify discord and create conflict. So do you have any tips for the intelligent use of social media?
Hi, thank you for your question. Yeah, I definitely can empathize with that question. And I think when it comes to social media, just making sure that you are checking your sources and, having the most accurate information is, the best tool in your toolkit. And being sure to always, sign up for emergency alerts, and that's one way to stay informed and have the most up-to-date. We're here together, as Rebecca mentioned it. When the unexpected happens, we're all going to rely on each other, and this is something that will put anyone in the most humblest of positions. And so I think as long as we approach that as a collective approach, one's approach will always determine one's response. So taking everything with a grain of salt and just making sure to think about what do you need to make it through and who depends on you, and start there.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Next question is for you, Rebecca. Question is, where can someone get water filters if they're not part of your family?
Yeah, I do have extra. So you can look online. There's a number of brands that are known to be solid brands. There are some vendors who sell them. I probably would just frankly go to Amazon. Just go to Amazon and look for the reviews. Life Straw is a good one. Sawyer is a good one. Berkey, if you want something that sort of sits on your by your kitchen sink. The Life Straws are really. You can also go to REI. Actually, anybody who's done any camping and hiking probably has used a water filter at some point. You should have one if you go hiking or camping. So REI is another good place, or any kind of outdoor camping type store. You could check those resources as well. Now, water filters, the smaller ones, they do get plugged up, so you'll have to pay attention to the filters and how many uses it can do, and also it's not going to screen everything out. It's not going to screen out the smaller particles. So take a look at the packaging to see what kinds of things it will filter and not filter.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, next question, Dr. Doug, back to you. On the graph of emotions over time, how is that impacted by multiple events? Is it a direct addition or a reset of the timeline?
Yeah, it's to tell the truth, we really don't know, because this is such a unique situation. But we know from previous, well, for example, from earthquakes, that it seems to be an extension. It's not a total reset, but basically we drop back to kind of that low point, depending on how severe the situation is. So it extends that timeline further, basically. But it's not a complete reset, because often people have picked up ways to cope in the meantime, and they can use some of those strategies. But it does make it a longer timeline.
Perfect, thank you. Sophia, jumping back over to you. How often should cloth masks be laundered?
Oh, every time you use your cloth mask, once you use it one time, you should wash your cloth mask. You should, anything if it's a reusable mask, you can definitely wash it and reuse it, but it's a one-time use, and then you need to wash it and reuse it. You should treat your mask, a reusable mask, like underwear, to be perfectly frank. And if it's not a reusable mask, that is exactly what that word means. It is not reusable, which means use it one time, and unfortunately, you have to discard it and throw that away, unless you can you have the kind of mask that can be cleaned through a certain processing system that I know the state is coordinating through different means.
Perfect, thanks, Sophia. So, moral of the story, treat your mask like your underwear. Wash it often. Okay, Dr. Doug, question for you. Are there lessons from the 1917 pandemic of people doing great things to help others that we can learn from?
You know, I'm not aware of specific incidents, and in some ways it's difficult to generalize, because social conditions are so much different. Families are so spread out now. 100 years ago, families were much closer. We do know that we had some of the same kind of social issues. That, for example, there was a very strong anti-mask movement. So that we can learn from. We can anticipate that may be an issue, but we don't know how to generalize basically social issues from that time. But that's a great question. I think it'll be a really good research topic.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Doug. That is it for our Q&A session today. Thank you all so much for joining. As you'll see on your screen, you can find all of the resources, the slides, the links, the materials, the recordings, all of the materials mentioned in this webinar. You can find them all at that website listed on your screen, mail.wa.gov/preparedness. It is also in the Q&A box. And if you are joining us from outside of Washington today, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping your state to also build resilience and be better prepared for disasters. Few final things. Please don't forget to finish our post-webinar survey. That link is in the Q&A box, and there will be prizes mailed out. One last little commercial break for you today is if you are from Washington, our governor is having a press conference this afternoon with behavioral health and mental health leaders. And so that'll be at 2:30, and you can find that on the internet. Just search for it and you'll be able to find it. So that'll be good information to follow up from this webinar today. Last but not least, all of the information you can ever need about this webinar is on this website. Thank you for joining us today, and have a safe rest of your day.